with the person that was attacked?
Yeah.
Where's the cougar at?
It's on top of her. They're killing it.
In this video, we will look at 4 terrifying incidents in which cyclists came face to face with cougars.
Go away, kitty! Go!
Some survived, while others weren't as lucky. As always, viewer discretion is advised. On a Sunday afternoon in early November 2025, 2 mountain bikers entered Whiting Ranch Wilderness Park in Lake Forest, California. The park is surrounded by developed communities, but its interior remains a network of canyons, steep ridges, dense brush, and mountain biking trails. Deer move through the area, and mountain lions are regularly detected there. The 2 riders were traveling along one of the trails when they noticed movement inside the bushes beside them. A mountain lion was watching from the vegetation. Instead of cycling away, the riders stopped and faced it. They placed their bicycles between themselves and the animal, creating a moving barrier while they began backing away. One of them recorded the encounter. At first, only the cougar's face could be seen between the leaves. It remained partly concealed, observing the cyclist from the edge of the trail. Then it stepped out. The animal was not a fully grown adult. Faint spots were still visible on its coat, suggesting that it was a juvenile that had only recently become independent from its mother. That did not make the situation safe. The young cougar walked onto the trail and began moving toward the cyclists. As the pair retreated, it continued following them. The riders kept their eyes on the animal and held their bicycles in front of their bodies. They shouted and attempted to frighten it, but the cougar did not immediately turn away. For several minutes, the encounter continued in the same disturbing pattern. The cyclists backed farther down the trail. The cougar closed some of the distance. Whenever they moved, it moved with them. A community wildlife specialist who later examined the recording believed the young cougar may have been curious and inexperienced rather than actively hunting the pair. However, the cyclist had no way to know its intentions while standing only a short distance away. A curious cougar and a predatory cougar can initially display similar behavior. Both may stare, follow, and attempt to close the distance. Near the end of the encounter, the animal suddenly accelerated. It ran directly toward the riders. For a few seconds, the slow confrontation became a charge. The bicycles remained between the cougar and the cyclists as the pair continued retreating. Before reaching them, the animal changed direction. It left the trail, disappeared down the side of the mountain, and did not return. Neither cyclist was injured. Park rangers were alerted, and another encounter involving what may have been the same juvenile was reported in the area. The riders had survived because they resisted the instinct to turn around and race away. They stayed together, faced the animal, and used their bicycles to make themselves more difficult to approach. The encounter ended without physical contact. On the morning of May 19, 2018, 31-year-old Isaac Cederbaum and 32-year-old S.J. Brooks were mountain biking on remote logging roads near North Bend, Washington. The route passed through the forested foothills of the Cascade Mountains, approximately 30 miles east of Seattle. At around 11:20 that morning, the cyclists realized that a cougar was following them. They stopped instead of attempting to outrun it. Both riders dismounted, faced the animal, and tried to make themselves appear threatening. They shouted, raised their bicycles, and made loud noises. When the cougar continued approaching, one of the cyclists struck it with a bicycle. The action appeared to work. The animal retreated, and the riders believed the immediate danger had ended. They stopped to catch their breath. Then the cougar returned. This time it did not remain at a distance. The animal lunged at Isaac and seized his head in its jaws. It pulled him to the ground and began shaking him violently. Isaac suffered deep wounds but remained conscious during the attack. As the cougar held him, S.J. Brooks began moving away. The movement redirected the animal's attention. The cougar released Isaac and pursued Brooks. Isaac was badly injured and losing blood, but the cougar had left him alive. He reached his bicycle and rode away in search of mobile phone reception. The logging road passed through an isolated area where a call could not immediately connect. Isaac continued for approximately 2 miles before finding enough service to contact emergency dispatchers. He reported that both riders had been attacked and that Brooks was still missing in the forest.
I got attacked by a mountain lion. My friend is up there.
I'm so worried about my son.
They located one of the bicycles abandoned on the road and began searching the surrounding woodland. Brooks was discovered away from the trail. The cougar was standing nearby. Brooks had suffered fatal injuries. The animal retreated when officers approached. Wildlife agents later used tracking dogs to locate it, and killed it several hours after the attack. Early descriptions suggested that the cougar was abnormally thin. A later examination at Washington State University found no obvious disease, injury, or physical abnormality that fully explained its behavior. The sequence of events demonstrated how unpredictable a determined cougar can be. Isaac and Brooks had followed the standard advice. They faced the animal, made noise, used their bicycles defensively, and successfully drove it away once. The fatal mistake was not necessarily something either cyclist had knowingly done. The cougar simply returned after they believed the confrontation had ended. When it attacked Isaac, Brooks was left with almost no safe option. Remaining close meant confronting a cougar already attacking another person. Moving away created the movement that drew the animal's attention. Isaac survived severe wounds and was hospitalized. Brooks became the first person killed by a cougar in Washington in 94 years. There was no camera recording the attack itself. However, Isaac's emergency call, the abandoned bicycles, and the search operation documented what happened after the riders disappeared into the forest. The case remains one of the clearest examples of a cougar returning after it has seemingly been frightened away. On February 17, 2024, 5 experienced cyclists began a long ride through the Tokal Creek area near Falls City, Washington. The women were members of the Recycled Cycles racing team. They were accustomed to riding long distances through difficult terrain, and they were traveling together rather than alone. Keri Bergere, age 60, was among them. By the time the group reached a remote logging road, they had covered approximately 19 miles. The cyclists were divided into 2 small groups but remained close to one another. There was no warning that a predator was approaching them. 2 cougars suddenly emerged from the brush. One continued toward the trees. The other changed direction and charged at Keri. Only a few seconds passed between the first sighting and the impact. The cougar struck Keri from the side and knocked her from her bicycle. The rider and animal fell into a shallow ditch beside the road. Before Keri could recover, the cougar closed its jaws around her face and lower head. Its weight pinned her against the ground while its teeth pressed into her jaw. The attack happened too quickly for the cyclist to use the normal deterrence methods of appearing large, shouting, or slowly retreating. By the time Keri's friends reacted, the cougar already had her. They immediately abandoned their bicycles and entered the ditch. Annie Bellotta attempted to choke the animal from behind. The cougar's neck was so heavily muscled that she could not restrict it. The others gathered sticks and rocks and began striking the animal. One cyclist used a small knife, but the short blade had little effect. Throughout the struggle, the cougar maintained its grip. Keri remained conscious. With the animal's jaws still around her, she pushed her fingers toward its eyes and nostrils, attempting to force it to release her. Her friends had to attack the cougar without striking Keri, whose head was partially concealed beneath it.
Kill it! Kill it! Ah! You can't hit it! Ah! Somebody hit it with the rock again! Oh, no!
Auna Tietz located a rock weighing approximately 25 pounds. She lifted it and dropped it onto the cougar repeatedly, carefully directing each strike away from Keri. Still, the animal refused to let go. The struggle continued for approximately 15 minutes before its jaws finally loosened enough for Keri to pull herself free. The danger was not over. The cougar remained alive and capable of attacking again. Keri was badly injured and could not escape quickly. Her friends therefore had to keep the animal restrained while simultaneously calling for emergency assistance. They placed one of their mountain bikes across the cougar and used their combined body weight to pin it beneath the frame. Several women stood or knelt on the bicycle, while others held the animal's legs and body. Beneath them, the cougar continued moving. A photograph taken during this period shows how desperate the situation had become. The cyclists are crowded inside the ditch, pressing the bike against the animal, while one of them contacts emergency services. Keri lay a short distance away. When her friends checked whether she was still conscious, she responded by raising a blood-covered thumb. For roughly another 30 minutes, the cyclists maintained their position. Releasing pressure could allow the cougar to rise, but remaining on top of it placed them within reach of its claws and teeth. Eventually, a Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife officer reached the scene. The officer killed the cougar, ending the 45-minute confrontation. Keri was transported to a hospital, where she remained for 5 days. She suffered extensive injuries to her face and head, along with permanent nerve damage. The cougar was identified as a young male weighing approximately 75 pounds. Tests found no rabies or major illness that could clearly explain the attack. Had Keri been cycling alone, the outcome would almost certainly have been different. Her survival depended on 4 friends who moved toward the animal instead of retreating. They fought at close range, pulled her from its jaws, and then physically held the cougar beneath a bicycle until help arrived. On January 8, 2004, 35-year-old Mark Reynolds entered Whiting Ranch Wilderness Park in Orange County, California. Mark was an experienced and competitive cyclist. At approximately noon, he was riding alone along the Cactus Ridge Trail when the chain on his mountain bike failed. Evidence found at the location indicated that Mark stopped and crouched beside the bicycle to repair it. That position left him low to the ground, facing the damaged bike and likely unaware of anything approaching from behind. A mountain lion emerged from the surrounding cover and attacked. There were no known witnesses. Investigators later determined that Mark had been overwhelmed before he could effectively defend himself. The cougar killed him, dragged his body away from the main trail, and partially covered it with soil and vegetation. His bicycle remained nearby. Approximately 4 hours later, 30-year-old Hjelle was riding through the same park with her friend, Deborah Nichols. Neither woman knew that another cyclist had already been killed in the area. Anne was riding ahead as the pair traveled along the trail. She rounded a bend and passed close to the location where the cougar had concealed Mark's body. There was a sudden movement from the brush. The mountain lion leapt onto Anne's back and knocked her from the bicycle. The animal weighed more than 110 pounds. It closed its jaws around Anne's neck and head and began pulling her away from the trail. Deborah reached the bend moments later. She first attempted to frighten the cougar by throwing her bicycle at it. The impact did not cause it to release Anne. As the animal dragged Anne toward a steep, brush-covered ravine, Deborah grabbed one of her friend's legs. A tug of war began. The mountain lion pulled Anne by the neck while Deborah held her lower body and resisted with all her strength. Despite Deborah's efforts, the cougar continued, dragging both women through the brush. It moved roughly 30 feet from the trail. Their screams attracted other cyclists. The riders gathered rocks and began throwing them at the cougar. Some moved closer and struck at it while Deborah refused to release Anne's leg. The animal continued holding Anne for several minutes before the repeated attack from the cyclists finally forced it to let go. It retreated into the vegetation. The group lifted Anne and carried her back toward the trail. She had severe bite wounds to her face and neck, along with injuries across her upper body. Emergency crews evacuated her to a hospital. Anne remained hospitalized for 8 days and underwent extensive surgery. Her helmet was believed to have provided some protection, while the cougar held her head in its jaws. As authorities searched the park, they discovered Mark Reynolds' bicycle and then his concealed body. The two apparently separate emergencies were now connected. That night, deputies located a male mountain lion near the place where Mark had been found. The animal appeared unwilling to leave the area and was killed when it presented a continuing threat. Investigators concluded that the same cougar was responsible for both attacks. Mark had entered the park alone and was attacked while crouched beside his disabled bicycle. Hours later, Anne unknowingly approached the location where the cougar had stored his body. Anne survived because Deborah moved directly toward the attack, maintained her grip even while being pulled into the ravine, and continued resisting until other cyclists arrived. Mark had no one nearby to intervene. More than 2 decades later, another pair of riders would record a juvenile cougar following them through Whiting Ranch. They would use their bicycles as barriers, remain together, and leave the park unharmed. But for anyone familiar with what happened there in 2004, the newer footage carries a much darker meaning. The riders were not simply filming a mountain lion, they were backing away from an animal on a trail where one cyclist had already lost his life.